The French Empire has secretly been in power since they made their footprint on African soil. Yet the grey area of Westernization calls it economic influence. Is that really the case? The French Empire, imperialism, and colonialism are what the numerous African nations have been witnessing for almost a decade now. The seeds that were buried after the Ottoman Algiers were eradicated have now surfaced into a European existence within the impoverished lands of Africa. Remember, this is a country that has struggled in many forefronts for decades now. To think that the French Empire could have changed fortunes for them, but alas, it wasn't meant to be. Now, the fruit of modernization hasn't reached the nations belonging to the French colonization. The French influence isn't a relatively new concept, nor is it the aftermath of the World War when the country desperately needed to survive rather than thrive. The French colonialism, or invasion, started in 1830 when they defeated the Ottoman Algiers. During the 19th century, Algeria was part of the Ottoman Empire. The coastal regions, including Algiers, were under Ottoman rule, but the interior areas were largely autonomous. Algiers in particular served as a prominent center for piracy activities. The French colonialism, or invasion, started in 1830 when they defeated the Ottoman Algiers. France, under the rule of Charles X, launched a military campaign to conquer Algeria. The official pretext for the invasion was a perceived insult to the French consul by the Dey, that's the ruler of Algiers. However, underlying motivations included a desire for territorial expansion, economic interests, and perceived cultural and religious superiority. Well, to think that this continued 100 years from then shows what exactly is the agenda of the French within the region. Fast forward to post-World War II, when the decolonization movements were swept across Asia and Africa. France desperately needed to maintain its empire. Now, they were facing revolts from Algeria, Madagascar, and Indochina. In 1960, France was forced to grant most of its colonies independence. However, only a few were lucky enough. Call it a strategic move or a civilization mission, France decided to keep its empire in Western and Central Africa intact. The approach was straightforward. It was decided when an African country gained independence. It signed a cooperation agreement with France to become a part of their allegiance. Those African countries, including Benin, Burkina Faso, Guinea-Bissau, Ivory Coast, Mali, Niger, Senegal, Togo, Cameroon, Central African Republic, Chad, Congo Brazzaville, Equatorial Guinea, and Gabon. In response to French aid, these nations had to give rights over their natural resources, which the French military was looking after. Talk about modern-day slavery. The invasion became so strong that the French government tied their currencies, i.e. the CFA franc. In retrospect, these aren't just 14 countries out of 54 nations, but 26% of the continent being held by a single country. The French government has claimed that these steps were taken to improve Africa's economic landscape, but like they say, there are different versions of the truth. Since France is a respectable member of the European Union and a nation hailed as one of the most sought-after tourism destinations in the world, the country has a say. But things are difficult on the far end of the spectrum. While France framed these cooperation agreements as choices, defiance carried serious consequences. Guinea's leader, Sékou Touré, rejected the agreement, opting for poverty in freedom over riches in slavery. In response, France cut all foreign aid to Guinea and destabilized the government, leaving a lasting economic impact. This policy, widely known as Franc-Afrique, aimed at maximizing French interests, often installed leaders loyal to France, fostering a web of client relationships. Since 1960, France has intervened militarily in Africa over 50 times, protecting its hand-picked dictators and ensuring compliance with its interests. Gabon, a case in point, showcases a symbiotic relationship where France benefits from oil and uranium, while Gabon remains economically disadvantaged. There is a term widely used worldwide: money buys happiness. Well, there is a lot of truth in that. But with respect to today's discussion, we can also elaborate that money can buy freedom. The French colonial dominance is purely financial. It started when the country was in shambles after the war, but now it's taken all the power from those small African nations. We talked about the CFA franc. Central to France's economic dominance is the CFA franc, the last colonial currency still in use. Countries using the CFA franc have minimal monetary sovereignty. Their currency value is linked to the euro. This arrangement severely restricts credit availability, hampers export-driven growth, and discourages domestic industry development. The Ivory Coast, for instance, has a real GDP per capita a third lower than in 1978, showcasing the oppressive impact of the CFA franc on economic growth. The Ivory Coast's economic performance has been closely linked to the CFA franc, a currency that has both aided and hindered the nation's financial growth. While the CFA franc initially provided stability and facilitated trade, its rigid exchange rate has also constrained the country's ability to adjust to fluctuations in the global economy. This has resulted in a decline in real GDP per capita since its peak in 1978, highlighting the need for a more flexible monetary policy that allows the Ivory Coast to manage its currency and pursue independent economic strategies. Until recently, the CFA countries followed a practice where 50% of their foreign reserves was deposited in the French treasury. This complicates things for the African nations. The convertibility guarantee implied that these nations could convert their CFA francs into euros at a fixed rate, ostensibly providing stability, but in reality, reinforcing France's economic control. So, without money or currencies that aren't CFA franc, these African nations are drowning further in modern-day French colonialism. So, let us ask you a question. Are we living in the early 20th century, or even further in the past? French colonialism in Africa never truly ended. Instead, it evolved into a more efficient form of exploitation known as neo-colonialism. The French no longer feign interest in building functional governments or improving living standards. Instead, it's blatant extraction, pure and simple. Today, France's economic power is intrinsically tied to its African influence. Without its African colonies, a term reflecting the enduring dynamics, France would be a significantly smaller economic player on the global stage. As former President François Mitterrand asserted, without Africa, France will have no history in the 21st century. This form of exploitation, often concealed behind economic partnerships, underscores the reality that Africa's former colonies need to be developed but overexploited. Although the French continue to overpower these nations and use their natural resources for themselves, that doesn't mean that they can't gain the upper hand. The only probable way to achieve sovereignty is for these nations to solidify their economic foundation so they can be truly free. Fortunately, it seems like the local population is against the modern-day French Empire. Things won't be easy for Africa. Let's not forget that France is one of the most powerful countries in the world, while these African nations aren't. The best solution would be for individual CFA franc states to establish their central banks and currencies, which could then be pegged to a common regional unit at an adjustable rate. This would grant monetary sovereignty to over 14 nations and nearly 200 million people. However, many African leaders fear the consequences of challenging French dominance. Any attempt to break free from French economic shackles would require a concerted effort across the CFA franc zone. Moreover, replacing the African elites who profit from the current system with leaders committed to self-directed development is crucial. It may be the most significant obstacle, as it requires a fundamental shift in mindset within the region. Today, France fears competition from China within Africa, and the CFA franc's colonial symbolism is under renewed scrutiny. Plans are underway to modernize the currency's name and remove overt symbols of colonial past to enhance its African identity. However, France remains committed to maintaining the system that has contributed to its economic prosperity. The million-dollar question is, will the future generation of Africans stand still while the 21st century French colonialism continues to wreak havoc? Only time will tell.